Well, on behalf of Converged User Group, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Converged and Hyper-Converged Infrastructure, the Best Practices for Measuring Business Value, presented by Stephanie Marcum and Jeff Smith. We are very thankful that you are participating in this webcast and for your continued support with Converged. You can learn more about the Converged User Group by visiting our website directly after the event today. We will automatically redirect you to our website once the event has ended. Before we begin, I too have a couple housekeeping items to go over. First, we will be recording today's webcast, and it will be available on demand at convergedusergroup.com by the end of the week. And secondly, as Stacey mentioned, we will be allowing for discussions throughout the event, and Stacey will be giving instructions each time we get to one of those sections throughout the event today. So in case you missed it in her presentation, she will go over again how you can participate in these discussion panels. On that note, let's get started. I would like to introduce you to today's speakers, Stephanie Marcum and Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Stacey. And we'll begin the conversation, and this will be a conversation with acknowledging that quantifying the business value of IT infrastructure can be daunting. And what we found is that there are a lot more business decision makers involved in making IT decisions, people from the business who are interested in knowing whether they got value from the investment in those decisions. And the fact that we're trying to do that with something that is infrastructure, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth, is infrastructure can be mathematically challenging. So our job today is to talk with you, share some of our best practices, and help you understand how we've learned to translate, track, and report business value and IT value as well for converged and hyper-converged. As they pointed out, this is a very interactive session. We have based this on a very successful Birds of a Feather session that we had at Dell EMC World on the same topic. And in looking for pictures to keep us visually moving along here about being interactive, I was looking for face-to-face meetings and found this picture, and it reminded me more of group therapy than a face-to-face meeting, but based on the Dell EMC World interactions we had, and Jeff, you can probably agree with this, there was a lot of frustration in the room about IT people who were frustrated with trying to get CFOs and other people in the business to acknowledge the value that they were getting from converged and hyper-converged and acknowledge the wisdom of the decision. So we'll have a little bit of group therapy here today, hopefully, and we'll also give a chance to share some of best practices from us and have you share with each other. I'm Stephanie Marcum. I lead the business value team in the Converged Platforms and Solution Business Unit of Dell EMC. And across my background, I have been involved in technology and finance throughout my entire career. I was a CPA for 25 years, had the chance to be a chief financial officer and VP of operations at a Thomson Reuters business unit. I was also at Thomson Reuters responsible for commercial software development for a number of lines of products for 12 years. And so across that experience with my clients when I was in public accounting and when I was at Thomson Reuters, I had the opportunity to help technology projects compete for funding, both for personally for projects that I was working on and other projects our clients were working on. So through that experience, we developed the ability to translate technologies into business results and business outcomes to help business decision makers make a good decision and to help us win the funding that we thought was due. And then in transitioning into the vendor space, my role has been to help customers with their journey of translating value. And then Jeff, if you could, I'd like you to please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Jeff Smith. I'm out of the Office of the CTO, covering all of America's. Been doing Converged for about 7 years, and mainly dealing with the value of Converged when it comes to transforming data centers and enterprises from a traditional siloed approach into more of a converged technology. Been doing IT for roughly about 20 plus years, running engineering groups and data centers. Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So Jeff and I have been working together for, 4.5 years now, Jeff. And so we've seen a lot of different customers' experiences with trying to translate the hyper-converged infrastructure into different kinds of value for the business. When we look at conversion, hyper-converged, there are 3 different dimensions of helping customers to get the most value out of their converged investment. And it begins with a measurement process, and it culminates with a measurement process. And in the middle is driving the transformation that creates value. And we're going to talk about the assess and the realize aspects of driving value in this conversation, where in the assess, we are helping you to determine the metrics and the baselines that identify what this infrastructure can do for IT and for the business at a strategic level, as well as a financial and tactical level. And then after you've made your investment, how do you go about measuring the actual value that was realized in order to feel confident that you've made a good decision? And you'll see we've got a continuous improvement-based measurement system that will help you to drive more value. Let's start by taking a look at the different dimensions of value that you can get from converged and hyper-converged. And this is one of our standard slides to help people understand the different types of outcomes that can be produced. And what's interesting to me is that although you all, I'm not sure exactly, we'll get into this in the discussion session, why you felt conversion, hyper-converged was the right decision for your business. But there are a number of reasons that can result in you thinking that this is a good decision for your business. But what tends to happen is that we tend, when we measure the value, to focus on less cost. And that's the only language that we know and the only way we know to express value. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but our goal is to help you identify ways that you can put math and words to communicating and quantifying what it means for your converged and hyper-converged to provide you with faster systems, how do you measure the impact of simpler systems, providing more agility to both IT and the business. So the first step in measuring value, in my experience, is that you have to open your mind to the fact that this is more than a cost exercise. So, Jeff, let me just turn to you for a second. And I know that you've done some work in helping companies to think about what you call IT revenue margin. Could you introduce that concept?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So from a macro level, and oftentimes we deal just in micro cost components of hardware and software, and conveying that value to an organization up as IT is growing 10x every 3 years, and how can we keep on driving or meeting the demands of the organization when oftentimes our IT budgets are looked at as a black hole and basically tried to keep flat or decreasing year over year. So how do we meet demand and also keep an efficiency moving forward and translate to that business? And one way that we've seen at a macro level is really understanding the IT to revenue margin of a corporation, which is basically just taking the total revenue of an corporation and dividing that by the total IT expenses to get a margin or a ratio. And what we found from consumer economics that has done this across many verticals is that the average IT to revenue margin is about 3.5% for companies, with financial verticals getting as high as 6%. At some point, there's a diminishing return. Basically, IT is a catalyst to running the business now. So if my IT technology is not keeping up with my revenue driving or increase, there's an inflection point that will happen where my IT investment actually becomes a hindrance to my revenue growth. And that's different for each company. But at a macro level, it's really understanding and starting at what's my IT to revenue margin ratio, and then how can I optimize that moving forward. My total cost of ownership may go up year over year to meet the demand of revenue and growth of the business, but what I really want to do is optimize my IT so that my revenue margin is decreasing year over year to a point that is most optimal for my organization.
Right. Very good. So in that concept, then again, just to kind of reinforce that, what you're saying is that you might actually spend more for IT, but what you're trying to do is keep the proportion. You're driving incrementally more revenue for every IT dollar spent and tracking that over time.
Roger that.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So when we go, that's a macro perspective. And I think that's really interesting, Jeff, because that's a way for us to track a very high level metric of how IT as an overall investment area is contributing to the business. When we go back to the converged and the hyper-converged portfolio, we start to come back to this reality that, as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, is translating this thing called infrastructure to business value, I think is very tricky. I came from a commercial software development background, and in commercial software development, we were developing workflow tools. And it's much easier to say if you're going to cut time out of a workflow or you're going to produce more revenue through the software somehow, that becomes much easier for people to grasp the value of that. But when you're investing in infrastructure, much as you're investing kind of in the business overall, as you were talking about with IT revenue margin, there's a lot of different reasons why you invest, and making sure that as you're communicating the success of your investment that you've recommended and made, you have to take into consideration other reasons, like you might be investing in this foundation in your infrastructure because the business has rapid growth, you're expecting some acquisitions coming in, or it's unpredictable growth, and so the infrastructure you chose was matched to the growth patterns. You might be investing to solve a technical problem, and that's important to take into account as part of the business decision of the infrastructure. You might invest because the infrastructure that you've chosen helps enable a larger IT technology strategy, like a move to a software-defined data center or a strategy to clean up the edge of the data center. And so taking that into account and helping other people outside of your immediate area understand the importance of that and the impact of that can be tricky. There are a lot of risk-based reasons that people invest in converged and hyper-converged as well. So, for example, reducing your security risk profile by being able to more timely and safely maintain all of the software elements through the release certification matrix, reducing the risk of delivery so that you have less supply chain risk, you have less risk that parts will show up and not be working, that you have to then, if you were going to assemble this yourself, that you would have to go and find replacement parts, it further delaying the delivery time for the infrastructure to be ready to have workloads. And then one of the other reasons that we see that's difficult to convey but can be important is making the IT organization a challenging and rewarding place to work. So all of that is to say that the business decision of infrastructure spans a lot of reasons that go beyond TCO and actually go beyond what most people can get their heads around how to measure. You compound that with the fact that most of us are technologists, and not CPAs. And this is where some of the group therapy comes in from talking with customers and highlighted at Dell EMC World. And that is that because we're not really CPAs, and most of us, and don't have a lot of experience in the math of value, but also selling and trying to persuade those who are CPAs, like chief financial officers, it can be really frustrating and to attempt the math and frustrating to try and win that math conversation. So a business value assessment process can help you explore more value dimensions. Just to further elaborate on the total cost of ownership, I don't know if most of you are familiar with the IDC studies that have been done in 2012, 2013, and 2015, where they looked at 32 customers across those three studies. And one of the very interesting points that they made is that only 1/3 of the value that customers reported they actually received was in the classic definition total cost of ownership. So as you're going through your exercise in trying to measure the value that's received, it's important to look at the other 2/3 of the value so that you can show the organization what a hero you are for producing value across more dimensions than just cost. And in this business value assessment process, it changes the focus from cost to value. And we'll talk about some of the metrics that we recommend and commonly find at the end of this presentation. It includes financial math, but goes beyond financial math. So if you think about it being, again, a business decision, the business decision can produce strategic outcomes both for the business and IT. And by that meaning that, for example, a business strategic outcome might be that you're wanting to go into supporting acquisition. That's one that I mentioned before, but supporting an acquisition. And this infrastructure is the fastest, safest way for you to onboard and a new acquisition. And then non-financial measures and decision criteria can also be important. And these are specific to your situations, but a few examples from experiences we've had with customers are that one of our customers was in a bit of a backwater area, a remote area in Michigan, and they had a growing problem with being able to attract and retain IT talent. And by the time they were evaluating their converged infrastructure, whether to use converged infrastructure in their data center, they had 54 open headcount in IT, and they had been unable to make any serious progress on reducing that number. And so part of their decision-making rationale was that by investing in converged infrastructure, they would be able to operate their infrastructure more efficiently, and that was going to take pressure off of having to find talent, which was very difficult. So that's an example of non-financial measures and decision criteria. A couple of recommendations for you all. You're probably familiar with the first book, and that is the Phoenix Project. What I really like about the Phoenix Project when you're starting to think about how do you measure the value that's realized is that in the Phoenix Project, infrastructure is the hero of this novel and real business outcomes are the happy ending. And I think it provides a lot of inspiration in the book about how you think about the impact of IT on the business. So if you haven't read that or it's been a while, I recommend you go back with the perspective of thinking about the business outcomes that this organization accomplished in the Phoenix Project. And another one, which is a little bit more dry, it's a math book, a little bit of a geeky math book written by a guy who doesn't think he's a geeky math person. He thinks he's a very engaging math person, but he's still pretty dry, is How to Measure Anything. There are two really important principles that I got out of How to Measure Anything. The first is to measure what matters, and we'll look at that later in our discussion. And the second thing is that he provides a way to think about how you measure what he calls business intangibles, which are things like soft cost savings and strategic results, and how you can go about thinking about measuring those things in order to communicate them to other people. I don't know if you guys are Audible audio book listeners, but both these books are really good books on Audible. Okay, and with that, we're going to, before we go into actually looking at measuring and talking about the value that's realized, I'd like to open up the discussion, and we're going to talk about your experiences. So if you're going to measure the value realized, it's important to kind of understand why the initial investment decision was made, because that's your starting point. So I've got a series of questions that Jeff and I are going to talk about and ask you to participate in. And we want to hear about your experience at determining the business value that your company expected from your conversion hyper-converged investment. So Stacy, would you remind us how we participate?
Yes. If you would like to submit a comment or question through the Q&A panel, please use that Q&A panel, which is located at the bottom right of the participants panel, or you can use the raise hand feature to tell us that you would like to speak verbally.
That's great. So we've got a few of you on the line. I would really love to have a conversation with you. If this is a really non-threatening environment, we'd like to be a resource to you and hear from you directly. So if you would raise your hands and get on line with us verbally, that would be fun and make this an interesting experience. So the first question or series of questions relate to the decision makers who were involved. And I'm curious who in your company cared about value when you made your initial purchase decision, and how you figured out what they meant when they thought of value. Because as we're opening up the discussion here, there was an interesting IDC study done on technology decision makers, and when they looked at who was making technology decisions, they found that there are 8 to 10 decision makers involved in the average technology decision. 58% of the technology decisions are made by the business, and every person out of these 8 to 10 had a different, what they called point of value, which means the reason that they thought a technology investment was important and how it would impact their part of the world was different. And so the first challenge that we have is, how do you figure out who all these people are that have veto power, approval power, and how do you determine how you speak to them and help them understand what they can expect from the investment? So, Jeff, I'll open it up first to you to ask you about some of the situations where you've helped customers and you've helped identify who would be involved in the decision-making process and how you would translate the infrastructure into something that was meaningful to decision makers.
No, thanks, Stephanie. I'll hit the obvious ones too, right? So, of course, the CEO level, and if you look at an example of that, a large automotive company in Detroit, they actually did a transformation of how they delivered applications and the software that runs their vehicles, moving from a vehicle company to more of a software company, and they actually bypassed IT, and that group is reporting directly to the CEO. So even at large scale, CEOs end up having a large say, which is sometimes unexpected from an IT person's perspective. They understand it, but knowing that they are definitely an influencer and understanding that. Your CFO, your CIO, your VP of IT, however your structure is. Some of the ones that are not as common that we've seen is business units. You could look at application developing business units that need speed, and so the value to them is how fast they can get their infrastructure to service their business units and their applications. There's also procurement and the procurement arm of consolidating down silos of contracts into one contract, and also asset management from the standpoint of managing assets as opposed to many different configurations into one consolidated group. So those are just some obvious ones, and then also some not so obvious ones that we've seen in the past.
Yeah. And, Jeff, one of the perspectives that I have, having served as a chief financial officer in the Thomson Reuters business unit, was that most organizations have taken all the fun growth parts of the business away from the CFO. So to the extent that the CFO is involved, usually what they're compensated on, what their personality is, and what their scope of influence on the organization is about saving costs. And so it can be a real battle to try and fight that perspective when you're investing for the future and you can't translate this directly into cost savings. And then I do think that the example that you gave with the automobile manufacturer, we've heard that technology is becoming the business. I've got one of my sons who works for one of the major financial companies, credit cards, and lending, and things like that, and they talk about themselves as a technology company, and money is their product. And so as companies increasingly see themselves as technology companies, there are lots of new people that get involved in the technology decisions to help them achieve their roles. Do we have anyone else?
We do have a question or a comment from Charles. Charles, your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi, my name is Charles Knopf, and I work with Purdue Pharma. And my story is pretty much the same, where I have a CTO that's very cutting edge. He was very easily, he was easy to talk with and see the value of where we were going on the whole roadmap. So first going to the V block with the converged infrastructure, settling on like equipment, drastically reduced the number of support tickets that we had in our data center. We've refreshed the V block with the all flash. Again, looking at decreasing our contracts with our third-party vendors that we get our L1, L2 support, and also reducing the footprint each time we do this. And now we've implemented our first couple VX Rails, which again continues that process, and hopefully being able to get more automation into our data centers. So it's easy to show from the reduction in our support contracts, the way we keep reducing our footprint in the data center, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So Charles, I appreciate you sharing that. Have you guys gone to the point, you raised a couple of different issues that interest me. One is the support for improved level of automation. One of the outcomes that you can get as a result of standardizing your infrastructure is it makes automation much more practical, because you don't have to deal with all the different technologies and configurations that hang up your ability to automate. So as you guys think about the value, one of the things you might consider is how can you communicate to others, just so they feel good about your decisions, how can you communicate to others the impact that your infrastructure decision had on your ability to execute on your desire to improve create higher levels of automation?
Yeah, correct. True.
Because higher level of automation usually translates, and so this is one of those where you just kind of keep peeling back the onion and asking one more why question. Automation usually leads to better service levels, and those better service levels usually lead to faster application development life cycles, or things like that relate to the business, and which the infrastructure didn't necessarily accomplish by itself, but it made it easier for you to accomplish. So I encourage you to kind of think about that and keep pulling that thread of the infrastructure being able to support your automation.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephanie, this is Jeff, and one other really surprising one that I'm starting to hear crop up as I go around the field, executive briefings from different industries and different verticals. As millennials grow from 30% of the workforce to 80% of the workforce in the next decade, HR and recruiting actually becomes very interested in the IT value and what that can do to drive their HR and recruiting. And even talking to universities, and some of them have medical centers attached to their universities, attracting students becomes a very highly valuable thing to them to keep in their university and their research center and their medical. So the ability to attract that actually adds value to their organizations, and also to keep up with that curve. And HR and recruiting has become predominantly interested in IT where they weren't before.
Very good. Very good. So, Charles, if you'll stay on the line here, we'll certainly open it up to anybody else who wants to join. But I just wanted to ask you, moving forward in some of the discussion topics, what were some of your frustrations and challenges that you had in either forecasting the value or now that you've made your decision at trying to actually measure the actual value that you got from the from your solution, from your converged and hyper-converged?
It's because I was able to show the hard costs. The soft costs was probably a little more frustrating because the CFO did not care about the soft costs. He only wanted to see how much you're saving me on the bottom line. But because I had the CTO that was convinced of where we were going with everything, he pretty much took the majority of that burden on and was able to get all that taken care of.
Yeah, it's interesting. CFOs and being a former CFO, I can say this because it's the pot calling the kettle black potentially, but they can just be kind of bullies about it too. They get where they stonewall you, and some of the conversations that I've had with CFOs are that those soft costs. That when our customers, you looked at our customers, a third of the value was only the cost savings. There's 2/3 of the value that's created beyond cost savings. And so what I try to help people like CFOs understand is this may not produce hard cost savings, but if we're going to take this business into the future and into a direction, we need to choose partners, vendors, technology decisions that take us into that future. And even if you don't mathematically agree to it, do you agree that it helps advance us as a business to at least find someone who can help us to redeploy people more efficiently so we can put more time at high-value projects like automation or maybe new product development initiatives, and getting them to at least acknowledge that although the soft costs may not produce financial savings, but they produce business outcomes and business savings, I know can be so frustrating.
Yeah, one of the frustrations that I did have around the soft costs was here at Purdue, we're not a huge company, but we have optimized the way we do our L1, L2, L3 support. And because we went to the V blocks years ago, because of the way we offshore our L1, L2, going to automation, the upfront cost was not going to save us a lot of money. We don't sit there and spin up VMs after VMs. So no matter how I tried to build the business case, and I'm talking about the hybrid cloud now, I could not go there. I couldn't get across, here's the soft costs over the next 3 to 5 years that we're going to save, and no dice.
Yeah,
we just
that
weren't
is
going to
so
save that much
frustrating.
because of how we do things today already. And that was because of the converged infrastructure making our processes very easy and able to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's almost like in a situation like that, when you're communicating to a person who just doesn't want to grasp it, what I try to do, and I learned this from my time in Thomson Reuters, is at least present them with information to hold them accountable that they heard it. Whether they will take it into consideration or not, I can't always control, but it's almost like you want to set up a comparison. Here is the converged option and the benefits it delivers us compared on the right with our other alternative and the benefits or drawbacks that it, offers us. It's so that it's kind of a side-by-side comparison, and whether they'll put math to it or not, at least they understand the differences between the two, and they have to at least have read it in a way that, you think you've communicated clearly the differences between the two solutions. So it sounds like in terms of successes, lessons learned, and recommendations, Charles, one of the things I would take away from you is part of your success was getting the buy-in of the CTO so that they could take some of the heat for the other aspects of the decision that you believed were important and you just couldn't get somebody else on board with.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that as important. Any other, Charles, recommendations, lessons learned, or successes from your experience?
Well, we have a very good, I guess I would call it Dell EMC now, but a very good team that supports us here in Purdue. And they were very helpful in helping me build the business case.
Great.
I would say definitely leverage your resources through your vendors. EMC was very helpful in helping me build my business case.
Yeah, Charles, I was talking about a study that IDC did on how technology decisions are made earlier, and one of the aspects of the study that they looked at was that what kind of help do buyers need? And they found that 66% of buyers don't know how to build the business case. And so you're right, because they're each kind of different too, and knowing how to translate a technology into a business decision is something that you have to master for each kind of product that you're buying. So I'm glad to hear that we were able to help you with that process.
Yeah, and it does seem like the vendors are getting it. They understand if they're going to make a sale, it's a partnership. They are going to have to help create that business case. So they're getting more and more involved in training around that.
Yeah, and Charles, that takes me to the next slide that I have, in the last slide in this section, and that is, I'm glad to hear you got the help and the information you needed and that we were able to provide that. Is there anything else that could have helped you more?
Nothing that I could think of.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. Anybody else who wants to raise their hand or ask a question? And we're about to move into the next section of the presentation and discussion, which is on now that the decision's been made, how do you help people understand the actual value that's been realized? All right. Let me set this up very quickly then, because I want to open it up for discussion. So if it's hard to set expectations up front, it gets even more hard if part of your job is to say where you are with your value experience today, where you've been with your value experience, and where you're headed with it, because it creates the need to have snapshots of value and to track your progress along the way. So we've been working with customers over the past few years to create an approach called the Business Value Realized approach that uses facts, helps you take the metrics of value and track the actual metrics of value over time to help you strengthen your confidence and your organization strengthen your confidence that you've not only made it a good decision, but you're taking the right actions to drive value. This process, and I'm going to show you on the next slide what this process is meant to help drive the transformational changes. And one of the aspects of conversion, hyper-converged, is that making changes to the people, process, and organization really help to create more value. And so this Business Value Realized process that we've created helps to drive that transformation. It also creates opportunities to identify improvement. And that's improvement for us as your vendor, for your partners, and for you, because we stop and we take a look at where we've gotten and say, have we gotten as far as we need to go? What else could we do to do things better? And it's something that we don't get enough opportunities to do is to celebrate success. I don't think that we tend to be very good about that. So what we've designed is a process where if you achieved great results, we want to help you get those facts together and share those for your career advancement, for your confidence in your organization, that IT has the IT business under control, and also for us as your vendor to celebrate success as well. And then finally, a process that develops ownership in results. And by that, what we found is that often the converged infrastructure decision or hyper-converged is made as a kind of a top-down decision, or maybe one of the compute storage pillars is making the decision, but you have to have the buy-in across a number of different areas of IT and get everybody pulling the same direction for value, or you don't get the most value out of that investment. So the process that we've designed is very simple. It's meant to help drive value, be lightweight, and help to support you in your journey. And we begin that with determining what to measure. So back to that book that I mentioned, How to Measure Anything, that is measuring what matters. So you start with measuring the things that will really tell you if you're getting value out of the business, and we'll talk about some of those metrics. Create a baseline, set goals for what you want those metrics to be, implement the changes if you need to drive that value, to drive to that set of metrics, help you inspect results, and celebrate success, identify improvements, and then have a continuous improvement loop. And we've identified a few best practices along the way in working with customers. One is that measuring business value realized is most effective if you've got the strong support from IT leadership, so that they're helping across the organization and down the organization feel accountable and bought in to driving the most value and measuring that. Having a BDR program management person who will help keep up with the cadence of the business value realized, hosting meetings, asking for the metrics, reporting out the metrics on a regular basis. And this doesn't need to be a full-time program manager. It just needs to be someone whose job it is to make sure that the meetings are held, the data is gathered, and the data is shared. Having accountability from key IT managers is another best practice, because we span server, storage, and network with conversion, hyper-converged. We span architecture, engineering, and operations. Having those key managers that can help produce the value from conversion, hyper-converged on board, and all setting goals that will drive to the maximum value can be very important. So with that, we will open it back up to conversation. Charles is still on the line here. So Charles, as we move forward, I'll open it up to you and to Jeff first, and that is your experience in measuring the actual value that you've realized. And I'm curious, Charles, who in your company cares about or is asking, if anyone, about the business value that you've actually realized on that investment?
Well, the CTO, the CEO, and the CFO have all been asking for the past, I would say, couple of years. And I just wanted to say the reason I wanted to be on this webinar today is here at Purdue, like most companies, when times are good, money, the expense accounts aren't scrutinized as much. But when you're in the lean times, that's when these kind of tools really come to become important. And here at Purdue, we're going through where you have to build a business case for every project now that you want to bring to fruition. And we're all struggling with it because, like you said, we're not CPAs. So our IT group has developed some tools. One is called BERT, that helps you build the business case, and we're being trained on that as we speak. So this would be good to repeat in probably another 6 months, and I could have more feedback for you. But right now, I would say I'm one of those people that struggle with building the business case. I have I was just going to say, I have a very sharp CTO that is, when I go to his ear, he listens, he sees the value if there is, and then he'll take that and run with it while I'm trying to understand and build these business cases.
And Charles, if you don't mind me asking, what's your role in IT?
I'm the associate director of the data center operations, cloud storage, disaster recovery, business continuity. I did have automation in there, but like I said, I couldn't get the hybrid cloud approved that we could move forward with the automation. So I'm responsible for the everyday running of the data centers.
Yeah, and Jeff, I know you come from a heavy data center operations background. That's not in my background. What are some of your experiences in with the justification from that background?
No, I think Charles made a great point. It's not always about the current, and there are going to be ups and downs. So, and I'll reference back to the IT revenue margin. Utilizing that, or at least setting a baseline that is agreed upon at senior leadership and within IT as to what that baseline is, makes those future conversations easier. And the other thing that I'm seeing, especially around hybrid clouds and some of the other technologies that are coming out, is that even if you don't or have not established a baseline in the past, if you establish one now and get agreement that this is 100% of my cost of IT right now is a fixed cost to support our current revenue. And so even by adding automation into that technology moving forward, being able to move my costs from a fixed to a flexible cost pattern is a valuable tool to my organization, because if you think of the cost of IT around hardware, there's 5 different areas, right? Hardware, software, people, facilities, and data. And data can make up security and hosting and everything else. It's being able to turn those dials during the good times and during the bad times. So a lot of automation and hybrid clouds, et cetera, is about moving those costs from fixed to some flexible cost. Now, I may still spend that same cost in the next 12 to 24 months of my budget, but having the ability to have that cost be flexible, then I can meet the speed of demand as well as the turns of demand of what my business is. It may be a downturn, so I want the flexibility to reduce my expenses around those 5 areas. Therefore, automation is needed to turn those dials. It may be a quick upturn that lasts for 60, 90 days. I need to be able to turn those dials up to meet that demand, all while maintaining the 24, 36-month revenue margin optimization goal moving forward. So those are some of the things that I've seen as technology becomes more prevalent, is really looking at it not necessarily as a straight cost, but really a flexible. And if I can change it from 100% to 40% flexible, now I'm freeing up X amount of expenses, and that sometimes is justification for the technology moving forward. And the reason why I want to do that is now I have the flexibility, Mr. CFO, Mrs. CFO, and CEO, to flex those expenses up or down to meet the demands of business, where right now that's still 100% expense. If I have a downturn 12 months from now, that's actually that expense is still going to be there. Hopefully that makes sense for you.
Yeah, no, Jeff, that's a very good point. I wanted to ask, so is there anything out on the Dell website or EMC website that, like a template that says, here's how to calculate your costs to run your data center? I mean, I know the usual, right? What the labor costs are, the heating, the cooling, power. I just installed vRealize Business so that I can start getting the costs for running VMs. But is there a template or a spreadsheet anywhere that you can recommend that I could use to get that baseline?
I could definitely send you some, Charles. Let me, at the end of this, I'll actually take you under your email and I'll send you some white papers as well as some spreadsheets that I use internally.
Thank you.
And then, Stephanie, I do believe we do have some links associated with some of the tooling and stuff that we do use internally also.
Yeah, and they don't really focus, Charles, so much on the data center as in the infrastructure decision. So I've got some things that I can send you as you look at the infrastructure decision as well.
Sure. All right, thank you.
Great. All right, well, I'm going to move. We've got a lot of great conversation. It's always good to have more to talk about for the next time. And Charles, I like your idea. I'd love to check back in with you in 6 months and hear how things have gone and on your journey. So maybe we'll schedule a follow-up to one of the things, Charles, just to kind of continue what we were talking about. These that are listed here, and you guys can get access to this, this deck as well. These are the common metrics of value that CI and HCI produce, which is improvements in staff productivity. And we look at that in terms of how much time was being spent and now is being spent on the functions of architecture, engineering, and operations, and compare that to the amount of time that people were spending on new projects and initiatives before and after. And then we've got some ideas on the strategic impact, what the projects were, the strategic projects, and trying to help you think about the business impact of those, downtime, time to value, and then the data center environmental to space, power, and cooling. So I'll just tease that up a little bit, and with that, we will wrap things up. If you'd like to continue the conversation or get help, you can get that from each other through the Converged user group. You can get that from us at stephanie.marcum@dell.com, and there are so many Jeff Smiths in the world that we have Jeff.Smith too at Dell.com, and anyone in your account team can find us as well. With that, Erica, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie and Jeff, so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It was a great conversation throughout everybody. So thank you to all of you. For all those participating, we would like to invite you to our upcoming events. Next week, we will be at Cisco Live in Las Vegas on Monday, the 26th. And at the end of the week, we will be at .next in Washington, D.C. on the 29th. If anybody is in the areas for those events, please join our event. We would love to have you there. And just a reminder, you can always see more details and learn more about our event by going to convergedusergroup.com. And as soon as we end this conversation today, an event, you will be taken right there. So please explore it and enjoy what you see there. You will also be given a short online evaluation after this webcast. It'll automatically go there once the phones have turned off as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, and we hope that you enjoy it so much that you want to join us for our July webinar, which will be July 19th. More details will be coming, so be sure to check that out on our website at convergedusergroup.com. And from all of us here at Converge, we'd like to thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.